There is a moment in every spiritual journey when the question becomes too deep to ignore. Not a question of doctrine or ritual or belief, but something far more intimate, something that stirs quietly beneath the surface of the mind. The question is not, who is Jesus? But what does the presence of Jesus actually do for us? It's a question that cannot be answered by theology alone, because its answer is not informational, it's experiential. Jesus, as described in A Course in Miracles, is not a figure of the past. He is a state of awareness, a way of seeing, a quiet presence within the mind that remembers what we have forgotten. He is the part of consciousness untouched by fear, untouched by guilt, untouched by the stories that have weighed us down for so long. His role is not to condemn, not to judge, not to punish. His role is to remind. And yet, how do you remind someone who has forgotten themselves? How do you awaken a mind that believes its dreams are real? How do you speak to someone who feels separated from the very truth that sustains them? You don't force them awake. You shine a gentle light. The world we see is shaped not by truth, but by fear. We project our guilt into the world, and then we spend our lives trying to escape the shadows we created. We blame others. We blame ourselves. We blame the past. And somewhere in this cycle, we forget that guilt is not a divine fact. It is a psychological habit. It is the ego's anchor, the glue that holds illusion together. Jesus, in the language of the Course, is the reminder that guilt has no reality except the one we give it. He is the presence that whispers, beneath the noise of the mind, that nothing we have done can change the truth of what we are. He doesn't erase our mistakes. He shows us they never altered our worth. But to hear that voice, something inside us must soften, something must open, something must become willing to question the story we've been repeating for a lifetime. This story usually begins with a sense of separation, separation from love, separation from safety, separation from ourselves. The ego interprets this separation as sin. It tells us we have done something wrong just by existing. It tells us we must earn love, earn forgiveness, earn peace. And so we live as though God is a being keeping score, watching from a distance, weighing our failures. Jesus does not accept this story. He corrects it. He teaches that separation never occurred, that we remain as we were created, that guilt is a dream and fear is a symptom of forgetting. His function is to gently guide the mind back to the truth it has always carried, not by force, not by threat, but by recognition, because deep down beneath all the noise, we already know. We know that love cannot condemn. We know that innocence cannot be lost. We know that healing is a return, not a reward. And yet we resist this knowing. We fear it, not because the truth is frightening, but because it dissolves everything the ego uses to define us. The ego survives by creating tension, tension between who we are and who we believe we must become. Jesus dissolves this tension. To accept his guidance is to let go of the struggle, but letting go is not easy. We have spent years building identities around our wounds, our traumas, our defenses. We think these layers protect us. We think if we relax, if we surrender, if we open ourselves even a little, we will be vulnerable, we will be hurt, we will lose control. Jesus teaches that the opposite is true. The moment you stop defending yourself, you become invulnerable, not because life stops happening, but because suffering stops defining you. Pain may still appear, but it no longer becomes your identity. Fear may visit, but it no longer becomes your master. You begin to live from a deeper place, from a place beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the story of separation. That place is where he meets you. Jesus does not enter your life as a judge. He enters as a healer. But healing, real healing, is not the fixing of symptoms. It is the undoing of causes. And the cause of all suffering, according to the Course, is the belief in guilt. Guilt contracts the mind. It shrinks perception. It blinds us to the truth that is always present. When Jesus looks upon you, he sees nothing to forgive because he sees nothing real to condemn. But you don't believe that yet. So he works patiently within the space between what you believe and what is true. He meets you inside your confusion. He meets you inside your fear. He meets you inside the very places where you feel most unworthy. He doesn't avoid your darkness. He walks into it calmly, carrying a reminder you have long forgotten. You are not what you fear. You are what love remembers. And so the journey begins. Not the journey of becoming more worthy, but the journey of remembering you always were. Not the journey of fixing your sins, but the journey of understanding you never truly sinned at all. Not the journey of becoming spiritual, but the journey of removing the obstacles to the awareness of the love that is already within you. This is what Jesus does for us. He shows us the difference between illusion and truth, between fear and love, between guilt and innocence, between who we think we are and who we have always been. The world calls this redemption. The Course calls it awakening. The soul calls it home. And yet, this journey is only beginning. There is a point early in the journey when the mind begins to suspect that something in its worldview is incorrect. It's not a loud suspicion. It's a quiet fracture, an intuition, a whisper, a soft inner tug that says, maybe there is another way to see this. This whisper is the first sign that Jesus, as the awakened mind, is beginning to enter awareness, not through thunder, not through visions, but through invitation. Jesus does not impose truth on anyone. He waits for willingness. And willingness does not appear in times of certainty. It appears in moments of doubt. In moments when the stories we've built begin to tremble under their own weight. In moments when the cost of fear becomes too high to pay. The Course teaches that Jesus is the symbol of perfect willingness. He is the part of the mind that has already remembered truth, the part that sees clearly while we stumble through confusion. To follow him is not to obey. It is to align with the part of ourselves that sees love where the ego sees threat. To align with clarity where the ego sees chaos. To align with forgiveness where the ego sees blame. But alignment requires one thing above all: honesty. Honesty is the light that reveals the ego's tricks. The ego survives in the dark, where assumptions go unquestioned and fears go unchallenged. Jesus brings light into these spaces, not to shame us, but to show that every fear we hold is built upon a misinterpretation. Fear says, you are alone. Jesus says, you have never been alone. Fear says, you must defend yourself. Jesus says, you are already safe. Fear says, your mistakes define you. Jesus says, your mistakes are irrelevant to the truth. This is why his presence feels both comforting and unsettling. He doesn't attack the ego, but his clarity automatically exposes its foundations. When someone shines light in a dark room, the darkness does not fight back. It simply dissolves. The ego interprets this dissolution as threat. The soul interprets it as freedom. And so the early stages of the journey feel confusing. You stand between two voices, the old voice of fear and the newly emerging voice of truth. Sometimes they clash. Sometimes they overlap. Sometimes you forget to listen. Sometimes you listen too late. Sometimes you listen but don't trust. But slowly, something begins to shift. You begin to notice which voice brings peace. You begin to notice which voice brings contraction. You begin to notice which voice feels like home. And in this noticing, Jesus begins his real work, not by giving you new beliefs, but by removing the false ones you no longer need. The Course calls this the undoing. Undoing is not destruction. It is unlearning. It is the gentle dismantling of illusions you once believed were facts. For example, you may believe that love is scarce, that safety must be earned, that forgiveness is weakness. You may think guilt is responsible, that fear is natural, that suffering is meaningful. Jesus does not attack these beliefs. He simply shows you, through experience, that they do not lead to peace. And when a belief does not lead to peace, the soul naturally lets it go. This is the essence of spiritual maturity, not adopting new spiritual concepts, but releasing old psychological burdens. But the undoing process can feel like loss. It can feel like identity dissolving, like the walls of your inner world trembling, like the stories you told yourself for survival no longer fitting. This is not because something is wrong, but because something false is leaving. Jesus removes nothing real. He only removes what you created from fear. And when fear-made constructs begin to fall, the ego panics. It tells you that you're losing yourself. But the truth is the opposite. You're reclaiming yourself. The self you are losing is the one that was never truly you. This brings us to the next phase of the journey, one where Jesus begins to show the mind that innocence is not naive. It is strength. Innocence is the recognition that guilt is a lie, not because we are perfect in form, but because we exist in truth. The ego says, you are stained. Jesus says, you are unchanged. The ego says, your failures define you. Jesus says, your truth cannot be touched. This is the turning point. When innocence becomes more believable than guilt, healing becomes inevitable. Because guilt is the barrier that makes forgiveness seem difficult. When guilt dissolves, forgiveness is simply recognition. Recognition that nothing real has been harmed. Recognition that nothing real can be harmed. Jesus does not see your sins because he sees beyond perception. He sees the self the ego cannot see. He sees the holiness beneath all confusion. He sees the light beneath all stories. And when you begin to see even a fraction of what he sees, you begin to understand that healing is not transformation. It is revelation. You do not become something. You reveal what was always there. The ego hates this. Because the ego is invested in becoming. It thrives on improvement, progress, moral achievement. It tells you that spiritual value must be earned. Jesus counters this by pointing toward the present moment and saying, there is nothing to earn. You already are. This statement sounds poetic, but it is actually the most radical idea in A Course in Miracles. You already are, already whole, already loved, already worthy, already innocent, already joined with God. The ego has no answer for this. Because the ego depends on the belief that you lack something. Without lack, the ego cannot survive. This is why Jesus, symbolically, psychologically, spiritually, is the ego's undoer. He reminds you of the one truth the ego cannot tolerate. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. This is not theology. It is the mechanics of awakening. But even with this understanding, something deeper must happen next. You must begin to trust the voice of love more than the voice of fear. Trust is the bridge between recognition and embodiment. Without trust, you may glimpse the truth, but you cannot live it. Jesus teaches trust, not by demanding it, but by demonstrating it. He shows up in the exact moments when you expect judgment and offers only calm. He appears in moments of confusion and offers only clarity. He enters the mind during fear and offers only peace. This consistency creates trust. Slowly, the mind learns that love is reliable, that peace is safe, that innocence is natural. And as trust deepens, the old identity begins to soften. The parts of you that once clung to fear begin to loosen. The inner defenses begin to lower. And in their place, something new appears, a quiet, expanding presence that feels like truth. This is where the real transformation begins. There comes a point in the journey when trust begins to reshape perception from the inside out. It doesn't happen all at once. It arrives slowly, like a dawn that stretches its light across a landscape the mind believed would remain dark forever. And yet, Once this inner light touches something, it can never return to shadows in the same way again. This is where Jesus' presence becomes unmistakably transformative, not because he changes the world, but because he changes how you see it. At first, the world still looks the same people, the same routines, the same emotions that rise and fall. But something subtle begins to shift. The sharpness of fear softens, the heaviness of guilt loosens. The frantic pressure to fix everything starts to dissolve. You notice this quiet ease and wonder. Where did this come from? It came from the space Jesus opened in your mind, the space where peace was always waiting. The Course says that Jesus bridges perception and knowledge. Perception is the world the ego made. Knowledge is the world God created. You live between these two worlds, feeling the pull of both, until the pull toward peace becomes stronger. At this stage, the ego becomes unsettled. It senses its territory shrinking, its influence fading. But it doesn't attack outright. Instead, it uses subtle tactics. Memory, regret, anxiety about the future, old, emotional triggers you thought were gone. It tries to pull you back into the familiar tightness of fear. Sometimes it succeeds. Sometimes you slip. Sometimes you forget. But something crucial has changed. You now know you are slipping. You can feel the shift in your body, the breath tightening, the thoughts speeding up, the sense of inner pressure rising. But instead of drowning in it, you recognize it as a pattern, a habit of mind, rather than a fact of reality. And this recognition is the first true miracle. A miracle, in the Course's language, is a shift from fear to love, a shift in perception, a refusal to agree with the ego's interpretation of a moment. Jesus guides these shifts not by force, but by presence. You begin to notice this presence exactly when you need it. When anxiety rises, a quieting thought appears. When guilt tries to take hold, a gentler truth emerges. When self-judgment begins, a warmth within counters it. Not with words, necessarily. Sometimes with a feeling, a sense of being held, a recognition that you are not navigating your inner world alone. Jesus is not outside you whispering guidance. He is the part of your mind that has already healed. You are listening to your healed self. And this healed self begins to reinterpret your experiences in real time. Where the ego sees attack, he sees fear calling for understanding. Where the ego sees mistakes, he sees confusion calling for clarity. Where the ego sees guilt, he sees innocence temporarily forgotten. Where the ego sees sin, he sees an illusion begging to be undone. This reinterpretation is the essence of forgiveness. Not a pardon, not a moral correction, but a shift in perception so profound that the past loses its power. But the process of reinterpretation requires willingness. And willingness grows through experience. One day, a situation arises that previously would have triggered you. Perhaps someone raises their voice. Perhaps someone criticizes you. Perhaps an old wound is touched. The ego reacts instantly, almost automatically. The familiar tension rises. The story begins. They don't respect you, they don't care, you're being attacked. But before the story gains momentum, something interrupts it. A pause, a breath, a widening of awareness. You hear a gentle question within. What if this has nothing to do with you? The moment you consider that possibility, the entire interpretation shifts. You see fear where you once saw hostility. You see confusion where you once saw disrespect. You see pain where you once saw cruelty. And instantly, the emotional charge dissolves. This is Jesus at work, not changing the external situation, but revealing the truth within it. He shows you that every moment offers only two choices. See with fear or see with love. React with the ego or respond with awareness. Defend the self or recognize the self. And the more often you choose love, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, it becomes your default. This is the stage when forgiveness becomes effortless. Not because you are trying to be spiritual, but because you see so clearly that the ego's interpretations have never been true. They were habits, not facts. And as those habits weaken, the world becomes softer, clearer, gentler. Forgiveness becomes the way you breathe. But even in this growing clarity, the ego has one final stronghold: the belief that suffering is meaningful. This belief is ancient. It lives deep in the mind. It colors everything. The idea that suffering purifies you, strengthens you, redeems you. The idea that pain is holy. The idea that sacrifice pleases God. Jesus dismantles this belief more fiercely than any other. The Course says God does not understand sacrifice, because sacrifice is the ego's language, not God's. Jesus teaches that suffering is not noble. It is unnecessary. Suffering is simply the effect of believing something that isn't true. When you suffer, it is because you are holding a perception that conflicts with reality. And Jesus, as the healed mind, reveals this conflict with astonishing compassion. You may notice this revelation during moments of emotional darkness. When you feel overwhelmed by guilt, He reminds you gently that guilt is the ego's tool, not the soul's truth. When you feel unworthy, He shows you that unworthiness is an illusion, not a fact. When you feel alone, He reveals that aloneness is a misperception, never a condition. He does not remove your feelings. He reveals what they are made of. And once you see their source, you realize you are not their prisoner. This realization creates space. Space for peace, space for clarity, space for innocence. And into that space, love flows naturally. But the journey must go deeper still, because liberation from fear is only the beginning. Liberation from guilt is only the doorway. The real transformation happens when you begin to see yourself through the eyes of the presence that has guided you all along. You begin to see the Christ within yourself, not as a religious idea, not as an achievement, but as the truth beneath every illusion you have ever believed. And once you begin to see even a glimmer of that truth, everything changes. Your relationships change, your inner dialogue changes, your purpose shifts, your identity softens. You begin to feel a deeper current moving through your life, a current Jesus has been guiding you toward since the moment you became willing to question fear. And the next stage of this journey is the most intimate of all. There is a sacred turning point in the journey, one that cannot be rushed and cannot be manufactured. It arrives when the mind becomes quiet enough, healed enough, softened enough to allow an unthinkable idea to enter awareness, that the love you have been receiving from Jesus is not coming from outside you. It is coming from the part of you that has already awakened. This realization does not arrive through logic. It arrives through recognition. Something inside you whispers, "I know this presence. I have always known it." And suddenly, the relationship you thought you were having with a separate being becomes something infinitely more intimate. Jesus is not beside you. He is within the part of you that remembers God. This is the beginning of inner communion. Not prayer, not ritual, but a meeting of mind with mind, a merging of perception with truth, a dissolving of the boundary you once believed existed between your awareness and divine awareness. At first, this merging feels unfamiliar. There is a temptation to resist it, to hold on to the comforting idea of Jesus as a separate figure guiding you. But slowly, a deeper comfort emerges, a quiet recognition that the guidance you have been receiving was your own healed mind speaking to you through the symbol of Jesus. This is not egoic, it is liberating, because it means that the wisdom, the clarity, the forgiveness, the peace weren't given to you, they were awakened within you. The Course says that Jesus is the manifestation of the Holy Spirit, but the Holy Spirit is not external. It is the voice of perfect love in your own mind. You follow Jesus until you recognize that you are following yourself. This realization is the ego's undoing. The ego cannot survive a mind that recognizes its unity with love. Because the ego depends on separation. It depends on the belief that you and God are apart, that you and Jesus are apart, that you and love are apart. Once this separation collapses, the ego cannot rule you anymore. At this stage of the journey, something extraordinary begins to happen. The mind starts to reinterpret itself. You begin to experience moments of clarity that feel like they come from a deeper well than thought. You begin to feel impulses of compassion that arise before judgment. You begin to sense a strength that grows not from effort, but from surrender. You begin to notice that your reactions to life are changing in ways you could never have forced. You are not becoming better. You are remembering who you are. And with this remembering comes a deeper shift. You begin to see everyone through the same eyes Jesus sees you. This is one of the most profound transformations in the entire spiritual journey, not because it changes the world, but because it changes what you think the world is. For most of your life, you believed the world was full of separate minds, each locked inside its own body, each shaped by its own story, each capable of hurting or being hurt. You believed these minds were independent, disconnected, isolated. But now something inside you begins to question this. You start to sense that the same light you see in yourself is present in others, even if they cannot see it. You begin to understand that every attack, every insult, every unkind gesture is simply a cry for love, a cry you once made yourself before you learned to listen to a deeper voice. You begin to see innocence beneath fear. This does not make you naive. It makes you fearless. Because when you see innocence, you cannot feel threatened. And when you cannot feel threatened, you cannot be controlled by fear. This is one of the greatest gifts Jesus offers. The ability to see beyond behavior to the mind that is suffering underneath it. You begin to respond to others the way Jesus has responded to you, with understanding, patience, calm, and quiet certainty. Not because you are trying to emulate him, but because his way of seeing has become your way of seeing. This is what it means to walk with him. Not physically, but perceptually. And the deeper you walk into this new way of seeing, the more the world you once knew begins to dissolve. Not the physical world, the perceptual world, the interpretations, the judgments, the assumptions, the stories, the meaning you once gave everything. They begin to fall away. This falling away is not loss, it is liberation. Because in the space that opens, truth begins to take shape. One morning, you may wake and feel a strange, beautiful lightness in your chest. Not joy in the emotional sense, not excitement, but a quiet radiance, a sense of safety that has no cause, a sense of peace that does not depend on outcomes, a sense of clarity that does not depend on understanding. It feels like the aftermath of a storm that has passed while you were sleeping. This is the peace Jesus speaks of, the peace that surpasses understanding, the peace that does not fluctuate with circumstances, the peace that remains even when the ego shouts, the peace that whispers, gently but firmly, nothing real can be threatened. You did not earn this peace, you uncovered it. And the more you uncover, the more you begin to understand that Jesus' role in your journey is not to lead you somewhere new, but to bring you back to a place inside yourself you left long ago. A place where fear does not exist. A place where guilt has no home. A place where love is the only truth. This inner sanctuary is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new phase, one that moves beyond healing and into mastery. And mastery, in the Course's language, does not mean control. It means alignment. Complete, effortless alignment with the truth of what you are. This stage is where Jesus begins to teach you something far deeper than forgiveness or trust. He begins to teach you vision, not physical sight, spiritual sight, the ability to see not with the eyes, but with the heart, to see not forms, but meaning, to see not bodies, but minds, to see not fear, but the call for love underneath it. This vision changes everything. It changes how you speak. It changes how you listen. It changes how you respond. It changes what you value. It changes what you think is real. Vision is the doorway to true perception, and true perception is the doorway to the final stage of awakening, a stage Jesus has been quietly preparing you for from the beginning. There comes a moment in the journey when the inner landscape becomes more familiar than the outer world, not because you withdraw from life, but because you begin to navigate it from a deeper place, one shaped by vision rather than perception. Vision is not merely a new way of seeing. It is a new way of asterisk being. It is the mind aligned with truth, free from the distortions of fear. As vision strengthens, the world begins to reflect a different meaning. Situations that once seemed threatening now appear neutral. Moments that once felt heavy now feel spacious. Encounters that once triggered defensiveness now evoke compassion. This is not because the world has changed. It is because your interpretation has been replaced by a higher one, the one Jesus has been teaching you to accept. True perception, the Course says, is the final step before knowledge. It is the state in which you see everything as either an expression of love or a call for love. Nothing else. No judgments, no exceptions, just the quiet certainty that innocence is the only truth. At this stage, Jesus feels closer than ever, not as a separate presence guiding you from above, but as the steady current of clarity moving through your awareness. You begin to notice how effortlessly forgiveness arises now, not because you are being spiritual, but because you can no longer believe the ego's version of events. You look at someone who is angry, and instead of feeling attacked, you feel their suffering. Instead of defending yourself, you offer understanding. Instead of joining the conflict, you remain in the peace that sees through it. You realize that forgiveness is simply the willingness to see as Jesus sees. And once you have seen this way, even once, you cannot forget it. The ego may try to pull you back. It may insist that you must protect yourself, fix yourself, prove yourself. It may try to resurrect old guilt, old wounds, old narratives. But these attempts feel thinner now, less convincing, less real. They have lost their weight because you have glimpsed the truth beneath them. This is where the journey becomes both exquisite and challenging. Exquisite because you are tasting freedom, challenging because the ego is losing its identity. The ego's final defense is subtle. It tries to spiritualize itself. It whispers that you must earn enlightenment, that you must perfect yourself, that you must eliminate all flaws before you are worthy of what Jesus offers. It tells you that awakening is a prize to be achieved through effort. Jesus, in contrast, reminds you gently, you are already awake. You are simply remembering. This remembering unfolds naturally, not through strain. It unfolds every time you choose peace instead of conflict, every time you forgive instead of judge, every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose vision over perception. These small, quiet choices accumulate. They build a new foundation inside you, a foundation not of fear but of certainty, a certainty that you are guided, protected, sustained, not by an external force, but by the truth within your own mind. You begin to notice that you are far less reactive. A conversation that once would have escalated now dissolves effortlessly. A mistake that once would have triggered shame now becomes an opportunity for learning. A moment of fear that once would have spiraled into anxiety now passes like a cloud across the sky. This is the work Jesus performs within you. He makes your mind calm, not through suppression, but through understanding. He teaches you that fear has no real cause, that guilt has no real basis, that attack is always misperception. that suffering is optional, that peace is natural. You start to realize that the presence you once prayed to is now the presence you think with. Prayer shifts from asking to listening. Forgiveness shifts from effort to recognition. Healing shifts from fixing to remembering. And in this remembering, a new identity begins to form. Not the ego's identity made of history, wounds, and roles, but the identity Jesus knows you to be, the Christ in you. Not a religious figure, not a personality, not a role. The pure awareness that exists beneath all illusions. This awareness is not grand. It is quiet. It is steady. It is gentle. It is free. You begin to sense it more clearly. In the space between thoughts, in the moments of stillness, in the breath that rises and falls effortlessly, in the feeling of warmth that comes when you choose love over fear. You begin to feel that you are not becoming this awareness. You are returning to it. The Course describes this phase as the borderland, a space between perception and knowledge, a space where the old identity has lost its power, but the new identity is not fully settled. It can feel disorienting, like standing between two worlds. In some moments, you feel profoundly connected, light, open, expansive. In others, you feel the ego tugging at you, trying to resurrect familiar fears. This fluctuation is natural. It is the mind adjusting to a new center. Jesus' role here is essential. He stabilizes you. When fear rises, he gently corrects it. When guilt whispers, he silences it with truth. When doubt appears, he reminds you of what you have already experienced. When confusion clouds your vision, he brings you back to the simplicity of love. Love is the simplest truth in the universe. Fear is the most complicated lie. And slowly, you begin to see that your life is no longer being lived by fear. A shift happens, subtle but unmistakable. You begin to experience moments of true inner freedom. Moments when nothing external can disturb you. Moments when you feel connected to something vast and infinitely gentle. Moments when you are so present that the past dissolves and the future loses meaning. These moments are not accidents. They are the sign that vision is taking hold. And as vision takes hold, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your relationship with yourself heals. You stop attacking yourself with old narratives. You stop comparing yourself to others. You stop expecting perfection. You stop believing you are broken. You stop fearing that you are unworthy. You begin to treat yourself with the same compassion Jesus has shown you. You begin to recognize your own innocence. You begin to accept that you are worthy of love, not despite your flaws, but because you have none in truth. This is the beginning of inner wholeness, the beginning of a life lived from truth rather than fear, the beginning of a new identity, one not based on ego, but on awareness. But there is a deeper realization waiting, a realization Jesus has been preparing you for quietly, patiently. The realization that everything you see, every relationship, every challenge, every fear, every joy has one purpose: to bring you home to yourself. And that home is closer than you ever imagined. Home. It is a word that echoes in the soul long before it is understood. For most of your life, you thought home was a place, a person, a memory, or a feeling tied to the world. But as your perception softens and your vision strengthens, something radical becomes clear. Home is not external. Home is the awareness within you that never left God. This is the truth Jesus reveals, not by proclamation, but by reflection. He reflects your true nature back to you until the memory of love becomes stronger than the memory of fear. And once that remembering begins, the entire inner world shifts. You begin to notice that forgiveness is not something you give, it is something you uncover. You uncover it by removing the layers of guilt that covered your innocence. You uncover it by questioning the stories that told you separation was real. You uncover it by listening to the quiet guidance that replaces judgment with understanding. At this point in the journey, forgiveness becomes a form of vision. You no longer forgive because someone deserves it. You forgive because you see clearly. You forgive because you recognize the fear beneath attack. You forgive because you cannot deny the innocence that vision reveals. And once innocence becomes visible, a new form of peace emerges, deeper, more stable, more unshakable than anything you have known before. This peace is not emotional. It is existential. It is not a feeling. It is a foundation Jesus has been building within you, stone by stone, thought by thought, shift by shift. At first, this peace comes and goes. It appears in quiet moments, then disappears when the ego resurfaces. But with time, it becomes more consistent. It becomes the background of every experience. Even when the ego whispers, the peace remains beneath it like a calm sea beneath temporary wind. And this peace brings with it a new kind of clarity, the clarity that your true function is healing, not healing others through effort, but healing perception through vision, not healing by fixing, but by seeing correctly, not healing by doing, but by being. The Course says to heal is to make happy. But this happiness is not pleasure. It is recognition. It is the joy of seeing innocence where you once saw guilt. As you walk through the world with this new clarity, something extraordinary happens. Your presence begins to affect others. People feel calmer around you. Conversations soften. Conflicts dissolve. You find yourself speaking with a gentleness you did not have before. You find yourself understanding people without effort. You find yourself offering comfort without trying. This is the light Jesus cultivates in you, light that naturally extends because it cannot remain contained. You become a presence of peace in a world shaped by fear. You become a reminder of innocence in a world obsessed with guilt. You become a demonstration of forgiveness in a world addicted to judgment. But even as this happens, the journey is not yet complete. There is a deeper layer of healing that must occur, the healing of self-identity. Up until now, you have allowed Jesus to reinterpret your perception. You have allowed him to show you innocence in others. You have allowed him to guide you through fear, trust, and vision. But there remains one illusion the mind resists more fiercely than any other: the illusion of a separate self. This illusion is subtle. It hides beneath thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations. It hides in language, my life, my fear, my story. It hides in roles, in ambitions, in self-images. It even hides in your spiritual progress. The ego is clever. It can make a separate identity out of anything. But as vision grows, something begins to unravel. You start to notice moments, fleeting at first, then longer, in which the sense of I becomes less solid, less personal, less defined. You begin to sense awareness, not as something you possess, but as something you are. You begin to sense your identity not as a character in a story, but as the presence in which the story unfolds. Jesus stands at the threshold of this realization, guiding you gently toward it. He never forces this shift, because it is not a shift of belief. It is a shift of being. It often begins in simple moments. You might be walking, breathing, or sitting quietly, and suddenly the boundaries of your sense of self soften. The tension in your chest dissolves. The chatter in your mind fades. And for a short moment, you feel spacious. You feel open. You feel untouched by the problems that once defined you. You feel like the witness rather than the character. You feel like the sky instead of the storm. You feel like awareness instead of identity. And then the ego snaps back, trying to reclaim its shape. But the imprint of that moment remains. This is the beginning of the end of separation, the beginning of the remembrance that the Christ in you is not symbolic, it is literal. Jesus told you from the beginning that you are like him, not as a personality, but as a presence. Now you are beginning to understand what this means, not conceptually, but experientially. Your identity is shifting, not outwardly, but inwardly, not in your behavior, but in your being. You realize that you cannot separate yourself from the awareness that has been guiding you. You realize that Jesus is not a visitor, he is your true perception. You realize that the love you have been receiving is the love you are made of. You realize that the light you saw in Him is the light within you. And as this realization deepens, something profound begins to happen. Your fear of God dissolves, not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily, quietly, naturally. Because how can you fear what you are? How can you fear the source of your own awareness? How can you fear the very love that has been leading you home? This is where Jesus performs the most important function in your journey. He reconciles you with the truth of yourself. He reveals that God is not a distant being, not a judge, not a force, not a personality. God is awareness. God is presence. God is love. God is the ground of your being. You are returning not to a deity, but to your own essence. This is the true meaning of atonement, at-one-ment, the end of the belief that you are separate from love. And as the last remnants of fear dissolve, a new kind of life begins. A life guided not by ego, but by presence. A life shaped not by guilt, but by innocence. A life lived not from separation, but from unity. This is what Jesus does for you, not symbolically, not metaphorically, but literally. He leads you back to yourself, to the self you always were, to the self you forgot, to the self that never left. And the journey is still unfolding. There is a stage in awakening when the mind begins to sense that something irreversible has occurred, something subtle yet profound, like a shift in gravity. You may still appear to live as you always have, doing ordinary things, speaking ordinary words, moving through ordinary days. And yet beneath the surface, something vast and luminous has taken root, quietly transforming the way you experience existence itself. This is the phase when your inner teacher, Jesus as the awakened mind, begins to reveal the true meaning of union, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual aspiration, but as a living reality. The separation you once accepted as absolute starts to feel thin, fragile, almost transparent. You notice it first in moments of peace so deep they feel ancient, moments when you forget to worry, moments when you forget to judge, moments when you forget to defend, moments when you simply as. And in that simple being, you feel a quiet intimacy with everything around you. The Course calls this the holy instant, the moment when time collapses and only presence remains, the moment when the mind remembers that it is not alone. These instants begin to occur more frequently now. You may be walking in a crowded street and suddenly feel a wave of tenderness for strangers passing by. You may be sitting in silence and feel a warmth expand in your chest for no reason at all. You may be speaking to someone and notice that you are listening not with your ears but with your heart. You may find yourself forgiving instantly, so quickly you don't even call it forgiveness anymore. It simply feels like clarity. It feels like seeing without the filter of fear. It feels like recognizing your brother as yourself. Jesus reminds you that forgiveness is not a gesture. It is a perception. It is what you see when fear is gone. At this stage, your inner world undergoes another profound shift. Fear becomes optional. It doesn't disappear completely, but it loses its authority. It rises like a faint echo and fades like mist. It no longer feels like truth. It feels like memory. You start to notice that fear is something you watch rather than something you are. It's like a cloud passing through a vast sky that has learned not to identify with its contents. The sky does not become the cloud, and you do not become the thought. Jesus taught you this indirectly every time. He showed you that love interprets differently than fear. Every time, He reminded you of your innocence. Every time, He brought you back to the quiet center of your being when the ego tried to pull you away. And now that center is becoming your home. But as you settle into this deeper awareness, another layer of healing begins, one that touches the very foundation of your identity, the healing of specialness. Specialness is the ego's last defense. It is the belief that you are unique in separation, either better than others or worse than others, either more guilty or more holy, either more deserving or more flawed. Specialness is the ego's substitute for equality, and equality is the doorway to unity. Jesus begins to dissolve specialness not by attacking it, but by showing you the profound relief of equality. Equality does not diminish you, it liberates you, because once you recognize that no one is above you and no one is beneath you, the burden of comparison falls away. The heaviness of self-judgment dissolves. The compulsion to compete disappears. The fear of inadequacy loses its foundation. You begin to experience relationships differently now, less as exchanges, more as mirrors, less as negotiations, more as shared awakenings. You see that every encounter is an opportunity to recognize the same light in another that you have begun to recognize in yourself. You stop taking things personally because you see that attack is always confusion, not truth. You stop hiding because you see that vulnerability is simply honesty. You stop pretending because you see that authenticity is the natural state of a healed mind. This shift ushers in a deeper kind of peace, one not born of retreat, but of understanding. Understanding that nothing real can separate you from anyone. Understanding that the boundaries you once defended were illusions. Understanding that love is not something you give, it is something you reveal. And as this understanding deepens, Jesus introduces the next stage of the journey, the release of the fear of God. This fear has been buried so deeply, wrapped in so many layers of shame and guilt, that you barely knew it was there. But it has shaped your entire perception of yourself. It whispered that you were unworthy. It insisted you were flawed. It taught you to expect punishment in the place of love. But now, with innocence returning to your awareness, this fear begins to loosen. You feel it when you experience a moment of pure joy for no reason. You feel it when you sense a benevolent presence in stillness. You feel it when the world looks softer than it ever has. You feel it when love flows through you so naturally it surprises you. You feel it especially when you realize that the presence guiding you, what you call Jesus, is not separate from what you call God. He has been preparing you for this moment all along. He introduces you to God the way a loving friend introduces you to the truth about yourself, not with demands, not with fear, not with threat, but with gentleness so complete that resistance melts on contact. You begin to understand that God is not a force to fear, but the essence of the peace you are beginning to experience. God is not a distant creator, but the life within your awareness. God is not a judge, but the source of the innocence that is returning to you. And once this understanding begins to dawn, something extraordinary happens. You feel drawn inward, not to escape the world, but to rediscover the self that animates it. Jesus does not disappear here. He becomes clearer, because the clearer you become, the more you recognize that He was leading you toward your own divinity all along. This is the beginning of the final phase of awakening. Not the end of the journey, but the beginning of union. A union so natural it feels like breathing. A union so gentle it dissolves fear without effort. A union so complete that the idea of separation begins to feel impossible. And the journey continues to unfold, ever deeper, ever quieter, ever truer. As the inner fear of God dissolves, a profound spaciousness opens in the mind, an interior horizon wider than anything you ever associated with spirituality. It is not dramatic. You don't feel lightning. You don't feel thunder. You feel something far more subtle and far more transformative. Safety. Safety not from the world, but within yourself. This safety is the quiet recognition that your existence is rooted in something benevolent, something unconditional, something that has never wavered, even in your darkest moments. It is the recognition that love has always been the truth, and fear was always the distortion. As this truth settles deeper into your awareness, something shifts in your relationship with Jesus. He does not feel like a guide above you anymore. He feels like a presence beside you, and at times even as you. Not because you are inflating yourself into something divine, but because divinity is no longer something you believe exists only outside you. The boundary between you and Him softens. You begin to understand that Jesus was never trying to create dependence. He was creating remembrance. He was leading you back to the part of yourself that is incapable of fear, incapable of guilt, incapable of darkness. He was teaching you to see the divine thread woven through your own awareness. And once you begin to see this thread, you discover something astonishing. You no longer walk toward truth. You walk from truth. The shift is subtle but revolutionary. Before you were trying to find the light, now you are the one carrying it. Before you leaned on Jesus, clarity, because you felt uncertain of your own. Now his clarity echoes naturally within you. Before you reached outward for guidance, now guidance rises effortlessly from within. This is not arrogance. This is awakening. The Course teaches that the ultimate goal of the relationship with Jesus is equality, not worship, not distance, not hierarchy, equality. Because everything he is, you are. Everything he remembers, you will remember. Everything he sees in you, you will eventually see in everyone. And that seeing is beginning now. You start to notice moments of profound gentleness toward yourself, moments when you look at your past without flinching, when you see your old mistakes without judgment, when you feel compassion for the version of yourself that once lived in confusion. This compassion is not sentimental. It is clarity. You recognize that your past self was innocent, not because it was perfect, but because confusion is not a crime. Fear is not evil. Guilt is not truth. Every error was a call for love, and Jesus answered those calls long before you knew how to. As you extend this same compassion inward, something else awakens: gratitude. Not gratitude as emotion, but gratitude as perception. You become grateful for the lessons, grateful for the healing, grateful for the undoing that brought you to this point. You become grateful even for the fears you once hated, because you now see that each fear led you deeper into understanding. This gratitude is holy. It is a sign that you are no longer resisting your life. You are welcoming it. And as gratitude grows, judgment fades, not only toward yourself, but toward others. Judgment once felt like a natural reflex, but now it feels heavy, unnecessary, almost absurd. It no longer fits the way your mind moves. Your perception has become too open to contain the rigidity of judgment. Instead of judging, you observe. Instead of condemning, you understand. Instead of separating, you connect. This is vision. And with vision, another extraordinary shift begins. You feel guided not only in moments of stillness, but in every moment. A thought comes, and you know whether it comes from fear or love. A decision arises, and you feel the direction instantly. A conversation unfolds, and you sense the right words without effort. A challenge appears, and your mind remains anchored instead of reactive. Guidance stops feeling like whispers from above. It becomes the natural intelligence of your mind. The Course calls this right-mindedness, the state in which the Holy Spirit's perspective becomes your own. Jesus describes this state as certainty, not about outcomes, but about truth. You may still face difficulties. You may still encounter conflict in the world. You may still experience moments of sadness. But the sadness does not destabilize you. The conflict does not define you. The difficulty does not consume you. Because beneath every experience, you feel a foundation that does not move. This foundation is love. This foundation is innocence. This foundation is the truth Jesus has been revealing from the start. And just as this inner stability strengthens, something beautiful begins to awaken, a sense of purpose. Not ambition, not pressure, not obligation, a quiet inner direction that feels like a deep yes rising from your soul. Purpose is not something you figure out. Purpose is something you remember. You begin to sense that everything you have healed was preparing you for something. For giving, for sharing, for extending love the way Jesus extended it to you, not through words necessarily, and not through any one specific form, but through presence. Your presence becomes the healing. Your presence becomes the teaching. Your presence becomes the demonstration of truth. And it happens effortlessly. You may say a kind word to someone, without realizing it changes their entire day. You may listen to someone with such sincerity that they feel seen for the first time. You may forgive someone silently, and suddenly the entire relationship transforms. You may walk into a room with calmness, and people feel safer without knowing why. This is what Jesus meant when he said you would do what he did. Not miracles of spectacle, miracles of perception, miracles of clarity, miracles of presence, miracles of remembering. And as this inner purpose grows, something extraordinary occurs. You begin to feel a merging between the guidance you receive and the guidance you give. You begin to feel the presence of Jesus not only helping you, but expressing through you, not as ego, not as persona, but as awareness. You sense that love is not flowing towards you anymore. It is flowing through you, and the more you allow it, the more natural it becomes. This is the beginning of extension, the holy function of the awakened mind. And as you extend love, the final phase of awakening draws near, a phase Jesus has been preparing you for since the moment you first became willing to question fear. The phase when you discover that the Christ in you is the same Christ in everyone. There is a moment in every sincere spiritual journey when the boundary between my awakening and our awakening becomes so thin that it begins to dissolve entirely. You start to sense that the light rising within you is not personal. It is not limited to your story, your body, your history. It is the same light that animates every mind, whether they know it or not. This is the beginning of recognizing the Christ in others, not as a theological idea, but as a lived perception. At first, this recognition appears quietly. You may look at someone who is suffering and feel an unexpected tenderness, not pity, not superiority, but a recognition so deep it bypasses thought. A recognition that beneath their confusion is the same radiant innocence you have begun to uncover within yourself. You may look at someone who frustrates you and suddenly see a younger version of yourself, a version who believed in fear, who believed in guilt, who believed in separation. And instead of reacting, you soften. Instead of defending, you breathe. Instead of judging, you see. The recognition grows from there. You may find yourself looking at strangers, people in the street, people in a store, people passing by, and feel an inexplicable closeness, a sense that their existence is tied to yours in a way the world cannot explain. You may feel a quiet love for them, not romantic, not emotional, but spiritual, a recognition that they share the same origin, the same essence, the same truth. This is what Jesus meant when he said that what you do to the least of these, you do to him. Because he is not a body, he is a consciousness, and that consciousness is shared. As this recognition deepens, your relationships begin to transform in ways you cannot predict. Some relationships soften and deepen, becoming environments of mutual healing. Others fade away peacefully, no longer sustained by the illusions that once held them together. Some relationships experience brief turbulence, as your perception shifts faster than the other person expects. But even that turbulence has a purpose, because you no longer see conflict as attack. You see it as confusion, and confusion is simply a call for clarity. Jesus teaches you to answer these calls with quiet strength, not passivity, not weakness, but a presence so stable that fear cannot survive in it. You become the calm in the storm rather than a participant in the storm. And yet, as beautiful as this is, the journey goes deeper still. Because recognizing the Christ in others naturally leads to the greatest undoing of all, the undoing of the belief in death. The ego's foundation is the belief that life is fragile, temporary, and threatened. But once you begin to feel the same awareness in others that you feel in yourself, an awareness that is not born and cannot die, the fear of death begins to lose its grip. You sense that life is not contained in a body. You sense that awareness cannot end. You sense that what you truly are is beyond all form. This recognition does not make you reckless. It makes you peaceful. Because once the mind no longer fears death, it no longer fears life. This is the liberation Jesus demonstrated not through words, but through his resurrection. A resurrection not to prove physical power, but to prove the unreality of loss. a resurrection meant to show that life cannot be ended, only misunderstood. When this understanding begins to dawn in you, the things you once feared lose meaning. Loss loses meaning. Rejection loses meaning. Failure loses meaning. Even time loses meaning. You begin to understand that anything that can be lost was never truly yours, and anything that is truly yours cannot be taken. This understanding brings a profound inner confidence, but it is not egoic. It is rooted in eternity, not identity. And as this quiet confidence grows, Jesus begins guiding you toward the final stage of awakening, the recognition of oneness. Oneness is not an idea you can grasp intellectually. It is a perception you grow into as fear dissolves. It is the recognition that all distinctions are temporary, that the separation between self and other is imagined, that beneath every form is the same essence, and that essence is the mind of God. At this stage, you may begin to feel a deep inner union with life. You may walk in nature and feel that every leaf, every sound, every movement shares the same awareness that looks through your eyes. You may feel that the world is not outside you. It is arising within your awareness. You may feel that every moment is connected, meaningful, intentional. This is not mysticism. It is clarity. The ego sees a fragmented world. Vision sees a unified field. Knowledge sees only oneness. And now, you are approaching the threshold between vision and knowledge, between the world of perception and the world of truth, between the self you believed yourself to be and the self you have always been. At this threshold, Jesus becomes more transparent, not because he leaves you, but because the need for symbolism fades. He was always guiding you toward the part of your mind that is indistinguishable from his. He becomes less a figure and more a state of consciousness, less a teacher and more your own clarity, less a guide and more your identity. His voice becomes your voice. His vision becomes your vision. His peace becomes your peace. And slowly you begin to understand the profound truth the Course has been pointing to from the beginning. The Christ is not outside you. The Christ is you. Not the you made of stories, not the you made of roles, not the you made of fears, the you that is pure awareness, pure innocence, pure love, pure truth. And once you begin to recognize the Christ in yourself, you can no longer see the world the same way. You no longer walk through life seeking to be healed. You walk through life extending healing. You no longer walk through life seeking love. You walk through life recognizing it. You no longer walk through life seeking meaning. You walk through life carrying it. This is the beginning of the final part of the journey, the part where you awaken not as a recipient of truth, but as its expression. There is a depth of awakening that words can gesture toward, but never fully contain. It is not an experience that comes with fireworks or visions. It arrives quietly, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding effortlessly into place. It is the moment when you stop seeking God and begin living from God. The moment when truth becomes not an ideal, but your resting place. At this stage of the journey, something immense yet astonishingly gentle occurs. The self you thought you were simply begins to fade, not die, fade. Like a shadow dissolving as the sun rises. You do not lose anything real. You simply stop clinging to what was never you. You no longer identify with your past. You no longer identify with your wounds. You no longer identify with your roles. You no longer identify with the body's limitations. You no longer identify with the ego's voice because it sounds foreign now, almost irrelevant. What remains is presence. What remains is awareness. What remains is the Christ mind the Course has been guiding you toward from the beginning. And yet this realization does not inflate the ego. It humbles it into extinction. Because the Christ in you is not a personal achievement. It is not a badge. It is not a spiritual identity. It is the recognition that you share your essence with all of creation. The separation you once took for granted begins to feel impossible. You look out at the world and see not objects, but extensions of the same light you feel within. You see that nothing is outside you because your awareness contains all things. You see that love is the only state that does not waver. This is not a mystical idea. It is an experiential truth. Jesus becomes your companion in a new way now, not as someone who walks ahead of you, but as the awareness you walk as. His love becomes your love. His clarity becomes your clarity. His strength becomes your strength. His certainty becomes your certainty, not through imitation, but through identity. You begin to understand what he meant when he said, "I am with you always." Because he is not with you as a second being. He is with you as your own awakened perception. And as this realization stabilizes, the world begins to feel different in subtle but profound ways. The past loses its emotional pull. The future loses its anxiety. The present expands, becoming spacious, luminous, forgiving. You no longer feel at the mercy of circumstances. You no longer feel controlled by moods or emotions. You no longer feel threatened by the chaos of the world. Instead, you see the world as a classroom, a place where every experience is an opportunity to extend love or deepen understanding, not out of obligation, but out of nature. Love becomes as effortless as breathing because it is now the ground of your identity. In this state, forgiveness becomes instantaneous. Judgment becomes meaningless. Fear becomes transparent. Guilt becomes impossible. You walk through the world with a calmness that is not learned, it is remembered. And with this calmness comes a deeper understanding of purpose. Your purpose is not to fix the world. Your purpose is not to preach or convince. Your purpose is not to perform miracles in dramatic ways. Your purpose is simply to be a presence in which others can remember their own innocence. This presence heals without words. It teaches without effort. It blesses without intention. It is what Jesus meant by being the light of the world. Not a special light, not a chosen light, the natural light of an awakened mind. As you live from this awareness, people will respond to you differently. Some will feel drawn to you, sensing a safety they cannot explain. Some will feel unsettled, sensing that their defenses cannot survive in your presence. Some will feel seen, perhaps for the first time in their lives. But none of this will feel personal to you anymore. Because you understand that you are not the source of the light, you are simply not blocking it anymore. This humility marks the final stage of your awakening, the stage the Course calls the happy dream. A state in which you still perceive a world but no longer believe in its illusions. A state in which you still walk among bodies but no longer feel confined to one. A state in which you understand that every moment is a doorway to truth. This stage does not last forever. It is a transition. For beyond perception, even healed perception, lies knowledge. Knowledge is not understanding. Knowledge is direct awareness of truth. Knowledge is the constant state of union with God. You do not reach knowledge through effort. You are carried into it as the final gift of awakening. But even before this gift arrives, you begin to feel glimpses of it, moments when the boundary between self and God dissolves completely. Moments when your awareness feels vast, infinite, uncontained. Moments when love feels like the substance of reality, not an emotion saturating it. Moments when the world feels dreamlike and truth feels unmistakably alive. These moments are foretastes of what lies beyond the dream entirely. And yet even these glimpses are not the destination. The destination is the constant awareness that you and God are not two. That separation was a dream. That awakening is inevitable. That innocence is eternal. That love is the only truth. Jesus has walked with you every step of this journey, not to elevate himself, but to elevate you to the recognition of your own divinity. The relationship was never meant to end in dependence. It was meant to end in equality. You stand now at the edge of the dream, looking at the world with new eyes. Not eyes of fear, but eyes of love. eyes that see truth beneath every illusion, eyes that see the face of Christ in everyone, eyes that recognize that all minds are one mind, all hearts are one heart, all beings share the same source. And in this recognition, something final and beautiful dawns. You are not awakening alone. Every mind that recognizes truth extends it to all minds. Every act of forgiveness heals the whole. Every moment of peace blesses the world. Every instant of love restores the memory of God to the collective mind. This is the true meaning of salvation, not a personal escape, but a shared awakening. And now, as you stand in the quiet radiance of this truth, Jesus' final message begins to echo within your awareness, not as words, but as knowing. What I am, you are. What I have remembered, you will remember. What I see in you is the truth of all creation. You were never alone. You were never guilty. You were never separate. You were always the light. And with this recognition, the journey completes its arc, not in an ending, but in a beginning. Because awakening is not the conclusion of your life, it is the true beginning of it. You walk forward now, not as a seeker, but as a presence, not as a student, but as a light, not as a separate self, but as the expression of love itself. The world has not changed, but you have, and through you the world will too. This is what Jesus does for us. He leads us back to the self we never lost. He awakens the truth that is always lived within. He guides us gently, patiently, lovingly, until we can finally say with him, I and the Father are one. And when this truth settles into your heart, the dream becomes a place of blessing, and every breath becomes an echo of peace, and every moment becomes an invitation to remember once again that only love is real.